Now you don't have to watch the rest of the video. But just in case you're curious, we're gonna give a detailed breakdown of everything that we've done to our Jeep Gladiator Mojave to equip it for rock crawling, but more than that, why each upgrade was done and why you might not need any of it at all. First question you're probably asking yourself is, why did we get a Mojave if we're just gonna rock crawl? The truth is, we had no idea. We got this thing in September of 2021. At the time, we were still living full-time on the road, and we needed something to flat tow behind our RV. Jeeps kept coming up as the ubiquitous option to choose, so we went with the Jeep. Before this, we had a GMC Sierra, and we had been on a couple of dirt roads in our entire lifetime. So we didn't know any better. If we had it to do over again, we would definitely have gotten Rubicon. You know, there's a few disadvantages to the Mojave. Again, we've covered this in videos. I'll link those above. The T-case, the lack of the front locker, the lack of the bed armor on the back, just a couple of things that make the Rubicon a better option for rock crawling than the Mojave. Not to say you can't do it, but it just is gonna take a little bit more money to make that happen. You know, the big question when it comes to suspension systems on the Jeep Gladiator is, should I stay with OEM or should I go with aftermarket? I think you should stay with the OEM first, and especially if you're new to this, run at least one trail so you can establish a baseline. So run it stock, run it completely stock on 33-inch tires, see what happens, let the Jeep talk to you, because believe me, it will. The first trail that we went on was Peters Mill Run in Virginia. We didn't know anything about off-roading. We come up on a rock, we dinged the lower control arm bracket. I thought I broke the Jeep. It was just an interesting experience, especially to somebody who's new to off-roading. That led to getting those lower control arm skid plates from Rusty's, which came in at $400. You know, we like to say most of our initiation from the Jeep world came from southwestern United States and Arizona, from a couple of guys who invited us into a Jeep club. We ran with them for several weeks when we were on the road, and the amount of chatter coming from below the Jeep just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So that's led to our first upgrade, 37s, a 1.5-inch spacer, and we re-geared to 488. Now we were starting to have some fun. We could start crawling over things that we couldn't crawl over before without making a ton of noise, and the trails are all of a sudden became a lot more enjoyable when you didn't have to worry about things scraping from below. Shortly after those, we ended up with the Apex quick disconnects. The Jeep Gladiator Mojave does not have a front sway bar disconnect, so Apex, a company called Apex, makes these auto links, and you just turn the one knob and the sway bar is fully disconnected. And then combined with the lift and the labor, we're now up to $6,850. At this time, we're still using the OEM box shocks, and I think for most people, this is a great combination. I actually would recommend the AEB spacer lift at this point over the Rock Crawler Budget Boost. I'm not even sure they actually make that anymore, but it just gives you an extra 1/2 inch. But for us, we just wanted a little bit more. We kept hearing too much chatter from underneath the Jeep, and part of that is because of the short stroke on the OEM Fox shocks on the Jeep Gladiator Mojave. Yes, they are nice shocks, but they do not perform well on rock, and that is because of the short 8-inch stroke. That's actually the same for all of the OEM shocks that come on the Jeep Gladiators. The Sport has less travel than that. I think it's actually almost 7 inches, maybe a little under 7 inches. But the short stroke, that 8-inch shock stroke, so every time we would go on an obstacle or come off on a rock, you would hear that clonk. You would hear the clonk, you hear the clonk, and that's that shock coming to full droop and just stopping. So we needed a little bit more. The ride quality off-road was bad. It is bad on OEM, and I say this as a person who has upgraded to a full suspension system and had the chance to compare. Once you upgrade to a full suspension system, it is like night and day. So less than a year later, we had the second lift, 3.5-inch Metalcloak Gamechanger, full suspension system, Rocksport, long travel shocks, Adams drive shaft, Fusion 4x4, 2.5 ton steering, the whole 9 yards. Putting that lift on and gutting the original suspension on our Jeep Gladiator Mojave was the best decision that we could have ever made. The ride off-road is like a cushy pillow of air. The long travel shocks just take up anything that we're mentally prepared to take this on at this point. Shortly after, we had an axle leak. Instead of taking it to the dealership and having them do warranty work, we opted to upgrade those to Chromoly rear axle shafts. So with those in place, this thing is definitely built for rock crawling, and we have taken it on some pretty crazy stuff. But it came at a cost. It is a rabbit hole, as you probably know. Now we have a 3.5-inch lift. Everything looks amazing, it looks tall, but we still have the stock bumper, and we are still getting ourselves into positions where we don't want to be in and where we would need a winch to get ourselves out. So after adding the bumper and winch, you've now added another $2,000, which now brings our total to $14,850. Then when you start adding in all of the incidental stuff that have really nothing to do with rock crawling, but does hold the recovery gear, like the light bars, the Molly panels, the tonneau cover, the HD ball joints that we had to upgrade to, all of this stuff adds up and brings us to our total of $18,000. But we're still not done. You know, there's a lot of things that we still want to do to this rig. The wheels are still stock, and we're not in a huge rush to change that. We're running 37 by 12.5 by 17s. We are running them on the stock wheels. If you're gonna do this, you will need a 1.75 inch spacer to clear those arms. We've never had an issue with it debeating or even burping, and that's because the wheel is not wide enough for that size tire. And that's actually the trick to running these oversized tires on these wheels like this. We can run them down to between 10 and 12 PSI and not have to worry about them burping. It's because they're wider than the wheel allows. So by the time you add wheels, you're gonna end up at almost about $25,000. But the good thing about this is most of these parts are buy once, cry once. You know, the Fusion 4x4 2.5 ton steering in the front is absolutely overkill, but there's a lifetime warranty. So if you ever do anything to that, they'll replace it. Same thing with a lot of the components that come on this build. We are happy with the long travel shocks. It is a very bumpy ride on the road. It's not as smooth as it was with the OEM Fox shocks for sure. And running on sand dunes, those things heat up very quickly. But the ride off road is worth all of those drawbacks to us. But like I said in the beginning, you might not need any of this. And for us in the beginning, when we were stuck on 33s, we had a great time at our first event, the Winter 4x4 Jamboree. It's a great experience to get out with the community and to enjoy something completely new. So the truth is, you don't have to dump a ton of money into this thing just to take it off road. If you want to start small, get some 37s and an AEV 2-inch lift. The reason why I suggest 37s is because if you go 35s, you're just gonna want to wish that you went 37s. It's always gonna be in the back of your mind, so go ahead and just get it out of the way. If you're not gonna be doing any crazy off-roading, or if you don't really care about 8th gear in the freeway, then don't re-gear. Do it later. It's an expensive process. Bottlenecks and what's next. Those rear lower control arm mounts are definitely a bottleneck for us. We're constantly getting hung up on those, and those are actually more of an issue for us than the actual length of the Gladiator itself. The only way to get rid of those is by going to a long arm setup, and that's just something that we're not gonna do right now. The lack of a front locker is also an issue. We've been finding ourselves needing that more and more these days, and to actually book some of those higher trails at some of those events, you actually have to have a front locker. We do eventually want to get some sliders, but the ones that are on here, honestly, they work just fine. And of course the fenders still need to be dealt with. So we're almost there. So there you go. That's the truth of it all. That's how much money that we have dumped in on this thing to bring it to the rock crawling status it is today. And we're having an absolute blast with it. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And as for us, we will see you next week.